The night before the engagement, my boyfriend went missing. However, his ex-girlfriend sent me a video. From the secretly taken angle, he was gently peeling an apple for her. Only then did I find out that he was in the hospital accompanying her for an abortion. The day before the engagement, Jonathan went missing. He didn't answer my calls and didn't reply to my WeChat messages. At first, I thought he was too busy to check his phone, but by the evening, I received a video from his ex-girlfriend instead. The video was taken from a sneaky angle. Jonathan was sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, the cuffs of his white shirt neatly folded up to his forearms, and the way he was bending his head to peel the apple looked extremely gentle. When I was sick before, he had also stayed by my bedside like this, peeling the apple peel into a long and thin strip. Because he was superstitiously strict about the belief that if the apple peel could be peeled continuously from the beginning to the end, I would recover quickly from my illness. And now, he was wearing the engagement ring that we had chosen together a few days ago on his ring finger, staying with another woman for the whole night. The engagement was cancelled. The reason I gave to his parents was, Jonathan went missing and called off the engagement. However, the next day, Jonathan showed up downstairs of my house, wearing a wrinkled shirt, with a storm brewing in his eyes. "Faye, you've really got some nerve. As your fiancé, I had to hear about the cancellation of our engagement from someone else." Looking at his angry face, I calmly found the video on my phone and showed it to him. "You disappeared without a word the day before the engagement. As your girlfriend, I had to find out your whereabouts from another woman. Jonathan, you're quite something too." If his eyes weren't blind, he must have clearly seen the sentence that followed the video. "Faye, I'm having an abortion in the hospital and no one is taking care of me. Don't blame Jonathan." The man who had been so fierce just a moment ago stood there in a daze. He suddenly grabbed my wrist, panic filling his eyes. "Faye, I can explain." I shook off his hand and said coldly, "You should give me an explanation." Jonathan let out a sigh of relief. His tall figure moved closer, with a calm and confident expression. "The child isn't mine." "So what?" He widened his eyes and looked at me in confusion. "What exactly do you want to hear then?" "Faye, stop being so unreasonable, okay?" It was as if the fact that he hadn't crossed the line was a huge favor to me. This superior kind of love was like a disdainful act of charity, making me feel that the years of my youth had been completely wasted. "Jonathan, you might as well tell me that the child is yours. It would be better than him leaving me, who was about to get engaged to him, for someone else's child." He didn't even bother to answer a single call or send a message to explain. He gave Meredith the chance and the confidence to show off in front of me. She clearly wanted to tell me on the night before our engagement that in Jonathan's heart, she would always be more important than me. However, that was indeed the case. The patience he showed to Meredith last night was completely absent when it came to me. "Faye, have you had enough? What on earth do you want?" My eyes were getting teary. My heart, which had been burning with jealousy all night, was now only filled with exhaustion and weariness. "Let's break up. Jonathan, I don't want you anymore." The person I had been holding tightly in my hands for 6 years was finally set free today. At the moment of passing by each other, I let him go, and I also let myself go. But just as I opened the car door, Jonathan, who had chased after me from behind, slammed it shut with a loud bang. He had a cold face, biting his back teeth, and each word was forceful. "I don't agree." "Don't agree?" I was so angry that I laughed. I deliberately taunted him with words. "Jonathan, I'm just informing you that trash should go back to the trash heap. Don't disgust me in front of me." I knew that he had always been a very proud person, with a good family background, good looks, and a high level of education. He had been a shining presence since childhood. So, I thought that by taunting him like this, he would surely turn around and leave in anger. But he didn't. He just held my hand tightly, looking at me in disbelief. "Please believe me. I'm begging you." I smiled and crushed his pride with my words. "Jonathan, let's part on good terms. You look really pathetic right now." Meredith was Jonathan's ex-girlfriend and also my best friend during college. The three of us met during a club activity. Because we had similar interests, We formed the Iron Triangle of the Youth Volunteer Association. Jonathan was quite famous in school back then. He was good-looking, studied well, and was excellent at playing basketball. It was no exaggeration to say that the girls who were chasing him could line up from the north gate to the south gate of the school. I was no exception. I inevitably fell in love with him. But before I was about to confess my feelings, Meredith suddenly said to me, "Faye, what do you think of Jonathan?" "What should I do?" "I think I might like him." I was completely stunned at that moment. My best friend had fallen in love with the guy I liked. This cliché situation was like a spell that froze me in place, and I couldn't say a word for a long while. It was like an unspoken rule among young girls. Whoever confessed their feelings first would claim the guy as their own. The one who spoke later would seem like they were stealing. Meredith hugged my arm and acted coquettish. "Faye, you'll help me, right? It's my first time chasing someone, and I'm not confident." What did I say back then? I said, "Sorry, I can't help you." Strangely enough, Meredith neither asked why nor showed any sign of anger. She calmly looked at me for a moment and then changed the topic to something else. A few days later, on Christmas Day, when I was holding a gift and ready to confess my feelings, Meredith showed up in front of me, sweetly holding Jonathan's arm. She said, "Faye, Jonathan and I are together." I looked at Jonathan, and he averted his gaze. I forced a very stiff smile that day. "Well, congratulations." Since then, Meredith had been constantly talking about Jonathan in front of me, sharing their love story sweetly, which made me extremely painful for a while. It was only later that I suddenly realized that Meredith had never regarded me as a friend. I thought that they were a couple who would finally be together. However, less than a year later, they broke up. Because the three of us were in different departments, it was difficult for us to have any interactions after we faded out of the club. When we occasionally met on campus, we would only exchange a brief greeting or pretend not to see each other. It was not until Jonathan graduated and entered the company where I was doing my internship that we had interactions again. However, Meredith was like an inescapable nightmare that appeared on the night before our engagement. On the day of the engagement, I, who should have been the leading lady at the banquet, showed up at the company as usual. When I went to ask my leader to cancel my leave, she looked at me several times, hesitating to speak. I pretended to be relaxed and joked half-heartedly, "The wedding has been cancelled too. At least in the next few years, you don't have to worry about my maternity leave arrangements." Sister Fong had always valued me and had been trying her best to promote me. She was always worried that I would enter the childbearing period soon after getting married, which would cause a gap in my promotion space. She thought for a moment and said, "Don't cancel your leave today. You'd better go back and rest today." No way. Without love, I need to earn more money. Losing both love and money would be the worst. Actually, I was afraid that staying alone would make me overthink things. It would be better to fill the time with work. However, the curious and inquisitive looks from my colleagues and their whispered conversations behind my back always made me remember, even in the midst of my busy work, that at this time, I should have been on that stage in the spotlight, making a lifetime vow with the person I once loved. The traces of our past love were still in front of my eyes, but everything had changed overnight. I blinked and picked up my cup and went into the pantry. Leaving those faint attempts at probing, I finally felt a lot more relaxed. I opened a packet of instant coffee. When I was pouring hot water, I was suddenly attracted by the geometric patterns on the cup. This was a mug outlined with black lines, with a minimalist style of white background and black lines. The patterns composed of squares and circles were made into a relief shape. A cup that matched my name quite well. It was given to me by Jonathan. It was an anniversary gift made by one of his clients. He said that when he saw this cup for the first time, he thought of the word Faye, so he gave it to me. When he gave it to me before, he was very casual, just like a small gift he brought back from a business trip. I didn't pay much attention when I received it. I just thought it was a bit cute and unique. But now when I look at it again, I feel that this cup exudes a bittersweet feeling. It was not until the hot water overflowed from the countertop and a few drops splashed onto the back of my foot that I suddenly snapped back to reality. I grabbed a tissue and crouched down to wipe up the spilled water. Obviously, it only took 3 tissues to wipe it clean, and the scalded area on the back of my foot didn't hurt much. But why were there still tears falling? It turns out that the breakdown of an adult can really happen in an instant. I buried my face in my knees and sobbed uncontrollably in the empty pantry. Dragging my exhausted body back home in a daze, I found Jonathan sitting outside my door. He was still wearing the same clothes as in the morning. The expensive shirt was wrinkled, and the buttons on the collar were casually unbuttoned, showing a bit of a downcast look. Seeing me, he awkwardly propped himself up against the wall and stood up from the ground. His legs were numb from squatting, but he only lightly stamped his feet twice to hide it. "Faye, can we talk?" His tone was soft, and his eyes were full of pleading. The Jonathan I knew had always been like an untouchable flower on a high mountain. Even after being with me, he was still as confident and in control as if he were the dominant one in this relationship. This was the first time I saw him so nervous that he was at a loss, even breathing carefully, for fear of disturbing me. Just a day ago, I was still fantasizing about wearing a white wedding dress for him. A day later, I was on guard and reached into my bag for the pepper spray. "Jonathan, we're over. If you pester me again, I really will call the police." His eyes flicked over my hand reaching into the bag, and he smiled bitterly. "We've been together for so many years. You know me. How could I possibly hurt you?" I relaxed a bit, but still didn't move my hand away from the pepper spray. "Yes, I do know you, but the person I knew wouldn't get entangled with another woman on the eve of our engagement. Maybe, I never really knew you." Jonathan took an excited step forward. "That incident." I quickly stepped back, and the spray in my hand was already pointed at him. He raised his hands in surrender and took 2 steps back to placate me. "I had my reasons for that incident. Can we talk about it?" "Fine. Let me ask you, did Meredith hold something over you, or did she hold a knife to your neck and force you to accompany her to the hospital for an abortion the day before our engagement?" Jonathan pursed his lips and said dryly, "No." "Then do you remember that when we first got together, one time in bed, you subconsciously called out, 'Ran?' It was the first year we were together, during the sweetest honeymoon period. At the most intimate moment, he once called out the wrong name. It was so affectionate and passionate that he didn't even realize it himself, but I heard it clearly. Back then, stupid me cherished this relationship that I got back after losing it so much that I lied to myself that it was just a slip of the tongue." His eyes were clearly on me, and he was kissing me. But this incident was like a thorn in my heart. It didn't hurt much, but it was always there. Obviously, Jonathan didn't remember it. He widened his eyes in shock and firmly denied it. "Impossible. I never loved her. The person I've always loved is you." I shook my head, forcing back the tears that were welling up in my eyes. "Maybe all these years, you've never really seen your true feelings. You shouldn't have come after me in the first place, tricking me into willingly being the touchstone for your love, making me look like a clown being mocked by Meredith. My youth and love were all wasted, just to set off their undying love. Meredith really slapped me in the face this time, proving that the man I held dear was just someone she could beckon with a finger. She was telling me that I lost to her when we were in school, and I still can't beat her now. Jonathan let her win against me. Faye." Jonathan gritted his teeth as he said my name, and his big hands clamped around my arms like pincers. "How could you think of me like that?" Just as I was about to break free from him, a hand came between us. With a forceful gesture, it pulled me into a broad embrace. A cold, low voice came from above my head. "Get lost." The person who came was my childhood friend Liam. He was supposed to be working in City A, but he showed up at my doorstep on a regular weekday, not a holiday or festival. And he stood on the opposite side of Jonathan with me, in a completely protective stance. Liam raised his eyebrows. "You were two-timing when you were together, and now that you're broken up, you're suddenly deeply in love? Hilarious. Late-blooming affection is cheaper than grass. I suggest you stop being so pathetic." Jonathan clenched his fists, and the veins on the back of his hands were clearly visible. This is between Faye and me. You, an outsider, have no right to interfere. Liam sneered, cracking his knuckles. Outsider? We were running around naked together when you were still playing in some corner with mud. Be smart and get lost. Don't dirty my Faye's eyes. Well, on second thought, maybe not. I was afraid he'd die too soon and we'd meet again. Liam looked at me in disbelief. At a time like this, you're still protecting him. Faye, have you lost your mind? I grabbed his hand again, headache starting to set in. I mean, he's not worth it. Liam blinked and smiled faintly, patted my head as if rewarding me, and then turned back to look at Jonathan provocatively. Jonathan, for once, held his temper and looked over Liam at me. Faye, I can explain everything. It's been 6 years. Can you really let go? He seemed to be stuck in a dead end, obsessed with that so-called explanation. He would never understand that in the face of complete disappointment, even love seems powerless. Jonathan, it's you who can't let go. After Jonathan left, I let Liam come in and only then noticed that he was actually dragging a suitcase. There was still an unpeeled luggage tag from the airport on it. I vaguely remembered that I had originally invited him to the engagement banquet, but he said he had to fly to City S for a business trip and couldn't make it. So why was he here now? Liam loosened his tie and said matter-of-factly, of course to come back and beat up that scumbag for you. What about your work? Didn't you go on a business trip? I took a leave. How about it? Am I not a really loyal friend? So, he couldn't make it to my engagement, but he could take a leave when I was heartbroken? What kind of loyalty is that? I rolled my eyes and casually handed him a glass of water. Tell me, what are you really back for? For you. Liam leaned against the bar, his smiling eyes looking half serious and half joking, tilting his head lazily. Really, more real than real. Liam refused to leave my house, saying he was afraid Jonathan would come to my door again. Thanks to his jinx, sure enough, the next morning, Jonathan showed up at my doorstep on time. Only this time, he not only looked dejected but was also extremely angry. Why is he here? I was about to say, none of your business, but Liam, with his big mouth, beat me to it. If I'm not here, should I be under your bed? Sorry, I'm not interested in the sordid affairs of scumbags and sluts. After saying that, he pulled me into his arms, his voice sounding ambiguous. Baby, I was tired all last night. You have to treat me to breakfast to thank me. He really was tired all last night. This germaphobe, who was staying in my guest room, complained that it was dusty here and moldy there. After rolling up his sleeves and cleaning it up, he even cleaned my room too. Not only was he tired all last night, but I was also forced to join the big cleaning under his constant nagging. However, Jonathan's mind went dirty. He couldn't believe it and was burning with rage. You too? Faye, you slept with him. I was about to say that's bullshit, but Liam covered my mouth. He said gently, baby, it's not classy for a beautiful girl to swear. Leave it to me. Immediately after, he turned around and cursed loudly. Bullshit. Eat your own shit if you have it. Don't spit it out and pollute the environment. You're blind, stupid, and shameless. You see everything is dirty. Whether there's something between Faye and me or not, it's none of your damn business. Mind your own business, like going to the toilet and farting. For a moment, it was so quiet in the corridor that you could hear a pin drop. Jonathan was a refined and noble flower on a high mountain. I had never even seen him get angry with anyone in public, let alone have a shouting match with someone on the street. Now, being bombarded by Liam's string of vulgar insults, he looked as aggrieved as if he were constipated. After following Liam out, I whispered, "Thank you, Liam." For what? For standing up for me. He flicked my forehead and walked away with his hands in his pockets. I didn't do it for you. Liam stayed at my place for 3 days and then flew back to the city where he worked. Only then did I realize that a heartbroken person really does need company. When I was with Liam, we were bickering and joking around, and I didn't really have time to feel sad. But when he left, the house felt empty again. So later, I almost never refused any invitations from my friends. However, I never expected to run into Jonathan and Meredith on Bar Street that day. I hadn't seen Jonathan in half a month, and he had lost a lot of weight. He was squatting on the roadside in a suit and tie, vomiting while holding onto a telegraph pole. The door of the convenience store nearby was suddenly pushed open, and Meredith's elegant figure came into view. The person who came was my childhood friend Liam. He was supposed to be working in City A, but he showed up at my doorstep on a regular weekday, not a holiday or festival. And he stood on the opposite side of Jonathan with me, in a completely protective stance. Liam raised his eyebrows. You were two-timing when you were together, and now that you're broken up, you're suddenly deeply in love? Hilarious. Late-blooming affection is cheaper than grass. I suggest you stop being so pathetic. Jonathan clenched his fists, and the veins on the back of his hands were clearly visible. This is between Faye and me. You, an outsider, have no right to interfere. Liam sneered, cracking his knuckles. Outsider? We were running around naked together when you were still playing in some corner with mud. Be smart and get lost. Don't dirty my Faye's eyes. Seeing that Liam's hot temper was about to flare up again, I quickly grabbed his hand. Liam, calm down. Liam looked at me in disbelief. At a time like this, you're still protecting him. Faye, have you lost your mind? I grabbed his hand again, headache starting to set in. I mean, he's not worth it. Liam blinked and smiled faintly, patted my head as if rewarding me, and then turned back to look at Jonathan provocatively. Jonathan, for once, held his temper and looked over Liam at me. Faye, I can explain everything. It's been 6 years. Can you really let go? He seemed to be stuck in a dead end, obsessed with that so-called explanation. He would never understand that in the face of complete disappointment, even love seems powerless. Jonathan, it's you who can't let go. After Jonathan left, I let Liam come in and only then noticed that he was actually dragging a suitcase. There was still an unpeeled luggage tag from the airport on it. I vaguely remembered that I had originally invited him to the engagement banquet, but he said he had to fly to City S for a business trip and couldn't make it. So why was he here now? Liam loosened his tie and said matter-of-factly, of course to come back and beat up that scumbag for you. What about your work? Didn't you go on a business trip? I took a leave. How about it? Am I not a really loyal friend? So, he couldn't make it to my engagement, but he could take a leave when I was heartbroken? What kind of loyalty is that? I rolled my eyes and casually handed him a glass of water. Tell me, what are you really back for? For you. Liam leaned against the bar, his smiling eyes looking half serious and half joking, tilting his head lazily. Really, more real than real. Liam refused to leave my house, saying he was afraid Jonathan would come to my door again. Thanks to his jinx, sure enough, the next morning, Jonathan showed up at my doorstep on time. Only this time, he not only looked dejected but was also extremely angry. Why is he here? I was about to say, none of your business, but Liam, with his big mouth, beat me to it. If I'm not here, should I be under your bed? Sorry, I'm not interested in the sordid affairs of scumbags and sluts. After saying that, he pulled me into his arms, his voice sounding ambiguous. Baby, I was tired all last night. You have to treat me to breakfast to thank me. He really was tired all last night. This germaphobe, who was staying in my guest room, complained that it was dusty here and moldy there. After rolling up his sleeves and cleaning it up, he even cleaned my room too. Not only was he tired all last night, but I was also forced to join the big cleaning under his constant nagging. However, Jonathan's mind went dirty. He couldn't believe it and was burning with rage. You too? Faye, you slept with him. I was about to say that's bullshit, but Liam covered my mouth. He said gently, baby, it's not classy for a beautiful girl to swear. Leave it to me. Immediately after, he turned around and cursed loudly. Bullshit. Eat your own shit if you have it. Don't spit it out and pollute the environment. You're blind, stupid, and shameless. You see everything is dirty. Whether there's something between Faye and me or not, it's none of your damn business. Mind your own business, like going to the toilet and farting. For a moment, it was so quiet in the corridor that you could hear a pin drop. Jonathan was a refined and noble flower on a high mountain. I had never even seen him get angry with anyone in public, let alone have a shouting match with someone on the street. Now, being bombarded by Liam's string of vulgar insults, he looked as aggrieved as if he were constipated. After following Liam out, I whispered, "Thank you, Liam." "For what?" "For standing up for me." He flicked my forehead and walked away with his hands in his pockets. "I didn't do it for you." Liam stayed at my place for 3 days and then flew back to the city where he worked. Only then did I realize that a heartbroken person really does need company. When I was with Liam, we were bickering and joking around, and I didn't really have time to feel sad. But when he left, the house felt empty again. So later, I almost never refused any invitations from my friends. However, I never expected to run into Jonathan and Meredith on Bar Street that day. I hadn't seen Jonathan in half a month, and he had lost a lot of weight. He was squatting on the roadside in a suit and tie, vomiting while holding onto a telegraph pole. The door of the convenience store nearby was suddenly pushed open, and Meredith's elegant figure came into view. She unscrewed a bottle of water and carefully held it to his lips. Admittedly, even after many years, I still couldn't bear the sight of them being together. It wasn't that I still had feelings for Jonathan, but the shame and not reconciled from that Christmas Eve years ago hit me again after all these years. I had misinterpreted Jonathan's feelings. I thought the ambiguity between us was a so-called mutual pursuit, so I specifically chose Christmas Eve to ask him out. However, what awaited me was the sight of them holding hands, fingers intertwined. Meredith proudly flaunted her prize to me. Every word and sentence seemed to say, "Faye, you lost." Years later, she was wearing a white cashmere coat, still with the same pure and elegant long black straight hair as before, looking as gentle and harmless as the snow falling tonight. "Faye?" A flash of shock crossed her face, and then she put on a perfect and appropriate smile again. "Are you here to see Jonathan?" What a coincidence. Tonight we're having a dinner with friends and he's had a bit too much to drink. We'll invite you to dinner another day. She stood in front of Jonathan, completely blocking the figure squatting on the ground. The way she was so nervous, as if afraid someone would covet him, was exactly the same as how I had been all these years. Unfortunately, I no longer cared to compete with her for the person she was tightly clutching in her hand. No need. We were never really friends anyway, and there's no reason for us to meet again. Meredith's smile slowly faded. She looked at me quietly and said softly, "Then don't show up in front of Jonathan again." Just then, Jonathan, who had been squatting on the ground all this time, suddenly stood up. He staggered over until he was standing in front of me. Snowflakes landed on his long eyelashes and melted in his red-rimmed eyes. "Why won't you see me?" Seeing that I didn't answer, he grabbed my shoulders in extreme dissatisfaction and shouted, "Faye, why won't you see me?" He looked at me with a hurt expression, as if he had 1,000 things to say. Meredith, standing nearby, pretended to be calm and came over to pull him. "Jonathan, you're drunk." Jonathan didn't even look at her and simply swung his arm to shake off the hand that was clinging to his arm. "Is it because of Liam?" Tears of fear fell from the corners of his eyes. "Have you fallen in love with him? Did you sleep with him? Tell me." Meredith bit her lip and came over to support him, actually trying to insert herself between us to separate me from Jonathan. "Jonathan, let's go home. You're drunk." Who would have thought that Jonathan, who had always been good-tempered, would simply push her to the ground, glaring at her with red eyes and roaring, "Get lost. Get out of here." As he pushed Meredith down, he himself also staggered and fell to the ground, but still managed to reach out and grab the leg of my pants. Like a child, he unreasonably questioned me, "Faye, have you fallen in love with someone else? Why won't you listen to me no matter how much I apologize? You weren't like this before." Indeed, I wasn't like this before. To be exact, I had never been like this. I was always the one to apologize first, always the one to compromise first. I was afraid of him getting angry, afraid of him leaving, endured his coldness, and would eagerly rush to him whenever he beckoned. I always loved him, always stood where he could see me when he turned around and touch me when he reached out. He was the one I held tightly in my hand. How could I have expected that it would be me who let go take the initiative? Jonathan, I just don't love you anymore. If everything in the past was because of love, then everything now is because of the lack of love. Disappointment accumulates over time, and love wears away until it's gone. Not loving someone is never because of anyone in particular. I didn't just lose to Meredith, but also to Jonathan. He spent 6 years showing me that there would always be someone more important than me, always something more important than me, simply because I wasn't that important in his heart. Jonathan, when I loved you, I worshipped you like a god. When I don't love you anymore, I'll crush you into the dust. Impossible. Impossible. How could you not love me? I looked at Meredith behind Jonathan, who had a look of not reconciled on her face, and suddenly it was as if I saw myself on that Christmas Eve years ago. So this is what it looks like to love someone but not be loved in return. It's such a pitiful sight. The thorn that had been stuck in my heart all these years was suddenly pulled out, roots and all. Perhaps, this thorn was never anyone else, but myself who was so humble back then. Meredith, you're so pitiful. I thought I would never cross paths with Jonathan again for the rest of my life. However, 3 days later, I saw him in the hospital. My mother fainted at the doorstep of our house and was seen by Jonathan, who happened to be visiting. He promptly sent her to the hospital. When I received the call and rushed to the hospital in a hurry, he had already asked someone to find an expert and had taken care of all the formalities. It was only a few days ago that we had gone from being lovers to enemies, and seeing him again today, it felt absurdly like a lifetime had passed. Auntie probably slipped and hit her head at the door, causing a brief coma. The doctor is still doing further examinations. You don't need to worry too much. The man who had always seemed superior in front of me seemed to have bent down, becoming cautious. Those eyes that had always been looking straight ahead finally lowered, gently and intently focusing on my figure. Thank you, Jonathan. I'll repay your kindness. I thought my softened attitude was a response to his life-saving kindness, but to my surprise, the light in his eyes immediately dimmed when he heard this. Faye, there's no need to say such things between you and me. We have no relationship anymore. It's better to be clear about things. If you ever need my help in the future, I'll be there. He looked at me quietly and curled his lips in a self-mocking way, then give me a chance to explain. After that, we'll be even. I thought he was going to explain to me again that the child Meredith had aborted had nothing to do with him, and a sense of impatience immediately surged within me. But considering that he had just saved my mother, and to prevent him from making some difficult requests in the future, I had to convince myself to endure it. However, when he opened his mouth, what he said was, I was the one who fell in love first. What? The first time I saw you, I liked you. In the first semester of freshman year, you were dancing backstage at the club's welcome party. That day, I was going to perform a folk dance on stage, which was part of a program combined with another girls' gouging performance in the club. Because I was a bit nervous, I practiced the moves in a corner where no one was before going on stage. That was the most memorable solo dance in my life. However, in my memory, my first encounter with Jonathan was during a club team-building activity at the end of the semester. At that time, the club rented a homestay for the team building. Halfway through, we ran out of drinks and snacks, and I, who had been eliminated from the game, was sent to the nearby convenience store to buy things. It was snowing that night and there were hardly any people on the road. Actually, I was a bit scared. But looking back at the lively inside the house, I thought I couldn't do something to spoil the fun, so I gritted my teeth and rushed into the convenience store. As a result, I ran too fast and slipped on the soles of my feet and directly fell into the snow. The first feeling was cold, bone-chilling cold. Then came the sense of grievance. Are you okay? Someone squatted down beside me. The halo of the street lamp made that handsome face look extremely charming. The snowflakes above my head were falling gently, like an angel descending to earth. Fine. Jonathan smiled and brushed the snow off my hair. I thought you'd be crying. He pulled me up, teasing me in a somewhat ambiguous way. His handsome side profile, bright smile, and the white mist of his breath became the most beautiful scenery that night. I always thought that winter was my one-sided love. During the team-building activity in the second semester of sophomore year, I had too much to drink. Someone helped me to the hotel. I thought that person was you. During that team-building activity, a few people left early, including Jonathan and Meredith. But the person who helped Jonathan leave was a guy, so I didn't think much about it. The next morning when I woke up, I found that the person lying next to me was Meredith. That Christmas when you asked me out, I knew you were going to confess your feelings. But after what had happened, I didn't know how to face you at all. I suddenly sensed something was wrong. Then why did you still show up? You knew clearly how much it would hurt me if you went on the date with her. To tell you. He said that 2 days later, Meredith secretly had an abortion and then called him. When he saw the pale and broken woman on the hospital bed, his sense of guilt reached its peak. He said that he knew there was no possibility for us anymore, and it didn't matter who he was with, so he agreed to date Meredith. But 1 year of dating was the limit, and he never fell in love with her. The child was her ex-husband's. She only found out she was pregnant after the divorce. The only reason I agreed to accompany her to have the abortion was out of guilt. She said she was really scared because she had already gone through the pain once before, and she said that having multiple abortions might affect her future fertility. So when she begged me, I just couldn't harden my heart and agreed. Jonathan's eyes were red, and every word was sincere. Faye, you're the only one I've ever loved. There really was nothing between her and me. Why can't you just believe me one more time? I do believe you. He stared at me in shock, his lips trembling slightly. Then why? I told you before that you might as well have told me the child was yours. That wasn't just angry talk. It would have been better than making me feel that even the child of your ex-girlfriend and her ex-husband was more important than me. I shook my head self-mockingly. You keep saying you love me, but what do you actually love about me? All you love is that one fleeting glimpse of me when I was dancing solo backstage. If you really loved me, then why was everything else more important than me? Jonathan's voice was hoarse. I'm sorry. I thought we had a long life ahead of us. I thought you'd always be by my side. At that moment, the elevator doors opened, and the nurse pushed my mother, who had just finished the examination, into the ward. I hurriedly got up and followed. When I reached the door, I stopped and didn't look back. Not anymore. Goodbye, Jonathan. I stayed in the ward all night. In a daze, I heard arguing outside the door. Jonathan didn't leave last night. He was still sitting on the bench outside the door until the early hours of the morning. Now it was already broad daylight. Could it be that he didn't even go to work? I hesitantly opened the door, only to see Liam standing in the corridor, looking a bit travel-worn, with that familiar suitcase beside him. Liam? He turned around and suddenly strode forward, pulling me into his arms. The snow on his khaki cashmere coat had melted, leaving it wet and cold from the outside. Faye, I'm back. I thought he was back to take his annual leave. Since the Chinese New Year was approaching, he had to use up all the vacation days he had accumulated before. But he said that his leave application was still being processed in the system when he got on the plane. When my mom told me that Auntie fainted suddenly yesterday, I rushed back right away. I remembered that when I was little, my mom always said that although Liam was a boy, he was more considerate than me, her daughter. From time to time, she would half-jokingly say that Liam was like her half-son. Look, how filial. Last night when Auntie called me, I told her my mom was fine. Look how worried you were. Liam hesitated for a moment before asking, what happened between you and him? I knew he was referring to Jonathan, and I remembered the arguing I heard at the door just now. That's it. From now on, we'll go our separate ways and owe each other nothing. Liam relaxed and leaned back in his chair, looking at me for a moment before letting out a long sigh. He smiled and said, I thought that since he saved Auntie, you'd forgive him. Perhaps, in everyone's eyes, during these 6 years of our relationship, I was the one who was least likely to let go. Once upon a time, I thought so too. But when the love really wore out, the trivial disappointments and exhaustion in life flooded over me like a tidal wave. It was love that killed love, and it was I who broke free from myself. But these things were not something I could talk to others about. All I said was, let's keep things separate. What's past is past. Faye, you've got guts. Well done. Awesome. I was just about to ask what on earth he was going crazy about when the next second he picked up the phone and blurted out, "No leave approved? I'm not even allowed to go back to my hometown when my mom is sick. Is there any humanity left? I quit. Do you understand what quitting means?" He hung up the phone, was quiet for a moment, and then said to me out of the blue, "Faye, I'm back. Brother, you really didn't have to go this far for my mom." But he smiled meaningfully. "From now on, she's our mom." On the day my mom was discharged from the hospital, Liam was busy running around, taking care of everything, just like a real son. On the contrary, I, the real daughter, was carrying big and small bags, following behind them like a chauffeur. "Mom, Liam, are you really not going back this time?" "Liam, no, I'll stay here to take care of you and my mom. Your mouth is so sweet, just like when you were a kid. You're still so likable." "I'm serious, Auntie." Mom paused for a moment and then asked with a smile, "You didn't quit your job for me, did you?" Liam also smiled. "Nothing can escape your sharp eyes." "Good luck. I'll try my best." The two of them put their heads together and giggled all the way. I was sitting in the driver's seat, feeling a bit jealous. "Liam, why don't you pack up and move to my mom's place to be her son?" Mom glared at me. I thought she was going to scold me, but instead she said, "Sure, I think that's a great idea." Liam, shameless as ever, took it all. "Faye knows me best." That's exactly what I was thinking. The next day, Liam really showed up at my doorstep with his suitcase. "I quit my job without another one lined up. I'll stay with you for a few days." "Brother, last time I said you should move to my mom's place, not mine, okay?" Liam blurted out. "Your mom asked me to move here." Mom was shouting on the phone. I asked him to go. "Your place is close to the city center, it's convenient for him to go for interviews back and forth. Why rent a place? Living together saves money, and he can take care of you. Mom will be at ease." I was speechless. I covered the phone and whispered, "Mom, he's a man, I'm a woman. It doesn't sound right for a man and a woman to live together in the same room." A few days ago when Jonathan was pestering me, I didn't think much about Liam staying for a few days. But this time he was going to stay for a long time. It's great that it's just the two of you. He's unmarried, you're unmarried. You two make a perfect couple. So that's what Mom was planning. Seeing that things didn't work out with Jonathan, she quickly arranged another option for me. "But you should at least ask Liam if he likes your daughter, me." Suddenly, a voice came from behind, "I like you." My mom's chatter was still ringing in my ears, but my mind was echoing with the words, "I like you." I turned around in disbelief, even imagining in slow motion that he would be looking all laid back and joking. He must be looking cocky with his eyes narrowed, his chin slightly raised, and a smirk on his lips, looking a bit of a playboy and asking for a beating. But no, Liam was leaning against the door frame, expressionless. In fact, he looked a bit gloomy. As if I smiled and punched him lightly, saying, "Are you kidding?" he would raise his fist and smash my head. He wasn't kidding. He said he had liked me since junior high school. He said we had originally agreed to go to the same university, but I broke the promise first. He said that when he found out I was with Jonathan, he took a flight overnight to the school to look for me, only to see the scene of me and Jonathan hugging each other. He said that after graduating, he left his hometown just to avoid me. He said that when he said he had to go on a business trip during the engagement, it was a lie, and when he said he came back to handle some business after the engagement was called off, it was also a lie. He didn't want to see me happy with someone else, nor did he want to see me sad and alone. He said that the last time he left was to go back and hand over his job when resigning, and this time he came back because he was afraid I would get back together with Jonathan. Fortunately, you finally came to your senses this time. Otherwise, I really would have pried open your head and smashed your brains. He said it so casually, but I was listening intently. I had always thought that the type of girl he liked was those goddess-like beauties with big boobs, a slim waist, a curvy butt, fair skin, long legs, and high IQ. Back in junior high school, the school beauty, who was a senior, chased him across grades but couldn't catch him. I couldn't believe he would like me back then, who was short, dark, and had a mushroom haircut. Isn't Liam a designer? Can he really get work with that kind of aesthetic? Seeing that I had been silent all this time, Liam got a bit impatient and shouted with a red face, "You don't believe me? I do believe you." He wilted down, looking at me carefully with red ears. Then, "Do you have anything to say to me?" I sighed. He suddenly stood up and rushed into the bedroom without looking back. "I don't want to hear it anymore." But I really just wanted to sigh about his aesthetic, that's all. Every girl would fantasize about a Prince Charming when she was little. And the prototype of my Prince Charming was Liam. He was fair-skinned and good-looking. Before the 3rd grade, he wasn't as tall as me, but after the 3rd grade, he grew like a spring onion. By junior high school, he had already grown into a handsome young man who could easily rank among the popular kids just based on his height and looks. Back then, when I was lying in bed reading those sad youth novels, I couldn't help but substitute the handsome male lead with his face. As for that kind of innocent liking, of course I had it. For a while, his initials always occupied my diary. But I also knew clearly that the special feeling he had for me was only because we were childhood friends living in the same building. I could clearly distinguish between fantasy and reality. Liam and I were friends, but not on the same path. Later, other names were written in my diary too, like the male leads in novels, K-pop idols, and the passionate protagonists in anime. Liam's initials, just like those names, were locked forever in the pages of my youth. But if you ask me if I still like him now? Before today, I naturally regarded him as a friend. But after today, anything is possible. 2 years later, Liam and I held a wedding on a sunny day. That day, my mom was the happiest person at the wedding. In 9 out of 10 snapshots, she was showing her big white teeth. "Mom, you're really happy. After today, Liam will really be your son." Mom rarely gave me a nice look. It's because my daughter is so capable. Believe in Mom's taste. It won't be wrong. Liam took the opportunity to be cute. I've been Mom's son since I was little. I gave him a sideways look. Don't be in a hurry to call her Mom. When you go on stage later, call her louder. There's a correction fee for you. A moment later, when we were standing on the stage and the MC was building up the atmosphere, I actually caught a glimpse of Jonathan's figure among the crowd. He was dressed very formally, with a gardenia, which I liked, pinned on the collar of his suit. Across the crowd, we stared at each other for a few seconds. He was grinning, looking like he was about to cry. I turned my head and whispered to Liam, "Did you invite him?" Liam raised his eyebrows proudly. "Yes." "Why? Are you going to set up a table for my ex-boyfriends?" "Humph, back then he kissed you right in front of me, which made me suffer for 6 years. This time it's his turn to watch me marry you and make him regret and suffer for the rest of his life." I have to say, Liam is really patient. Whether it's loving someone or hating someone. Childish. At that moment, the MC's voice rang out in the auditorium. "Now, please, the groom, kiss your bride." Liam leaned in, and his eyes and brows gradually overlapped with those of the boy in my memory. "Faye, we'll be together forever, year after year, for all eternity."